Yeah. Okay, let me click the go live.
Okay.
And then once that's started, I'll press record. That's us live streaming, and that's the recording started. So we're good to go when you are, convener.
Okay, thanks, Brian. All right, good morning, everyone. Let's make a start. I think, as we've just been saying, there is only one voting member of the committee at the moment, as the Falkirk Falkirk Council member will be confirmed at the full IJB meeting on Friday. Do we have any apologies for this morning's meeting?
From Roger Ridley and Robert Clark.
Okay, thank you. And are there any declarations of interest in relation to any of this morning's items? Seeing anything round the table? Okay, can we move on then to the minute of our last meeting, which was 17th of March. Go through it first for accuracy. And the papers, page 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Okay, are there any matters arising that don't come up elsewhere in this morning's agenda? I didn't have anything. Not seeing anything around the table, so we'll move on to item 4 then, which is the Strategic Risk Register. Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. So this report provides an update on the Strategic Risk Register and any changes since it was last presented to the Audit Committee on the 17th of March earlier this year. As always, the Strategic Risk Register remains an important aspect of our corporate governance arrangements, and it supports delivery of the strategic plan. The register is regularly reviewed, and a summary table is presented in section 4.1, where we see the 10 strategic risks, 9 currently rated as high risk and 1 rated medium risk. The last column within the table notes that there has been no change in the risk rating, but that masks the considerable amount of work that is undertaken reviewing each risk in detail. There's a flavour of that work in the detailed Strategic Risk Register attached as Appendix 1. We've previously spoken about Risk 4, capacity and infrastructure, and the desire to separate that into 2 distinct risks. That remains the current thinking, and we plan to do that as we work through a series of deep dives on each risk. It's likely one of our lesser risks may drop off the Strategic Risk Register as part of that process, so that we can continue to focus our attention on a manageable number of strategic risks where our priorities and attention must remain. The first planned deep dive will be the finance risk, and a number of the bullet points in section 4.3 relate to strategic risk 1, the finance risk. Section 4.3 notes a number of key considerations that have informed current ratings, and if we just use that finance risk as an example, we can see why the risk rating hasn't yet changed, or hasn't changed so far. On the one hand, we've completed the medium-term financial plan as one of our future actions. The 2022-23 draft accounts indicate an underspend was delivered against the integrated budget, and many of the underlying causes for that underspend continue. That all of these things would point to an improvement in the risk rating. However, the cost of living crisis continues, with inflation remaining stubbornly high for longer than previously anticipated, and our partners have raised their finance risk rating due to their concerns. So there are both improving factors and deteriorating conditions. And that's resulted in the overall risk rating remaining unchanged at this time. But we will continue to take a close review of all the risks, including risk 1, and we will review it. It's actually later this week as we start our first deep dive on the finance risk. couple of our other strategic risks have a future risk rating of low, as noted in section 4.4 of the report. I suspect that position will change in light of emerging risks and as we undertake the deep dives later in the year. We've already touched on Appendix 1, the detailed strategic risk register. Each page starts with a brief narrative articulating the specific risk and concludes with another short narrative that outlines some of the key considerations and key changes since the previous risk review. And I think that just brings us on then to the recommendations. The committee is asked to consider and comment on both the high-level summary in section 4.1 and the detailed strategic risk register in Appendix 1. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of work going on and still to go on. I understand what you're saying about the finance risk. I think with everything that's going on at the moment and the future position as per the medium-term financial plan, I think it would be a surprise to see that risk rating dropping at the moment. I think keeping it high is probably very realistic right now. Okay, did anyone else have questions or comments on the risk register? So those deep dives will be done by the management team, and then any proposed changes will come back through the system. Is that right, Stephen?
Yes, Chair. It's the first deep dives on the finance one, and it was deliberately targeted as the first deep dive because that will be my first experience of going through that process with both Sarah and Hugh. The deep dives, some of them we will be supported by the NHS board's risk management team. So Sarah is doing the finance one, and some of them Hugh will be the lead support. So it's very much a watch and see for me too, to understand exactly how we'll go through that process. I know Hugh and Sarah have been doing lots of work in the background to map out that plan. So I will be better informed after we've done the finance one. But I would imagine it would absolutely make sense, not only that we report back our strategic risk register on a quarterly basis, that where we've done the deep dives, that needs to feature too, just to provide extra assurance to the committee. Thanks.
Of course. Thank you. Tony?
Just a couple of things. We've looked at the finance deep dive in Forth Valley, and that was really very good. It's kind of model of its kind. It's one that we used, actually ripped off for other clients, so that's one that's certainly worth looking at. The other thing I would say is in the somewhat voluminous annual report, if you manage to make your way to the end of it, there are a series of kind of assurance questions and risk questions at the back, and I think those are helpful. I mean, obviously it's your deep dives and you'd have to tailor it for your circumstances, but some of the questions at the back were worked on with a number of risk managers, including an IJB person from Forth Valley, but 4 health board risk managers, 4 health board secretaries plus myself. So we kind of threw in some, I think, useful questions. So it'd certainly be worth having a look at those just to see if any of those could be helpful in terms of informing the deep dive.
Great, thanks, Tony. Okay, if there's nothing else on risk, we'll move on then to item 5, which is the internal audit annual report, and that'll be yourself, Tony.
Thank you. You'll be relieved to know I do not intend to take you through this line by line. There's a lot of it. The one thing that did occur to me just now, and it's obviously something for you to decide as a committee, given that we haven't got full membership at the moment, and there is quite a lot of work and quite a lot of information in that report, something we do elsewhere is that the annual report gets circulated either to all standing committees, when you have a kind of a big range of standing committees, as in the health board, or to all members. So that's something that you might want to think about in terms of just making sure that there's we put quite a lot of effort into this, as you can imagine. So it might be helpful for everyone to have a look at that. But I'll leave that to you to decide, and I'll just probably take a step back and provide some context to the report. So I think there's some important issues, not matters of detail, but just looking back, as we've discussed already, it's a very risky environment out there, and it's a very volatile environment. So that explains some of the gradings and the recommendations, which maybe in and of themselves don't look that serious, but we have to take them in the context both of each other, because there's quite a few recommendations there, relatively speaking, but also in the context of the environment. And the thing I'd like to emphasise most is that we don't do these things because we're auditors and we're obsessed with risk and governance and all that type of stuff. We make them because at this time of all times, you are facing risks greater than I've ever seen, and I've been in the NHS for 30 odd years. I've not seen things like this. I've never been in a situation where 1 minute an organisation might be looking at a £35 million deficit, the next it's not, and next week we just don't know. Or, in fact, where the Scottish Government is openly saying that it's £1 billion overspent, moving to 1.9. And if you add up the accumulated projected deficits of all the health boards in Scotland, you end up with what is a really quite eye-watering figure. So even if your part of the universe is okay, that doesn't mean that elsewhere things won't happen that could have a negative impact on you. And probably on that note, we talk a lot about financial sustainability, and reading the report again, I'm not sure we've actually been clear about what we mean by that. So, for example, a number of our IJB clients are in financial balance. That doesn't mean they're financially sustainable, because the way they've achieved balance is basically because, to put it crudely, can't recruit enough staff to spend the money they have. But that's not sustainable, because you can't deliver your services that way. So when we talk about sustainability, what we're talking about is your overall strategy, your strategic objectives, your workforce requirements, and your finance all being in balance. And that's not to say they're not, but it is a different thing from just hitting your financial targets every year. It means delivering all of your objectives within the agreed financial envelope. So I think that's an important distinction. And it probably takes us to the importance of governance in all this. So when we do have a fast moving risk environment, when we do have a number of external threats, and as we've mentioned in Forth Valley, we have very particular local circumstances which particularly relate to the relationship between the IJB and its partner bodies, especially the health board, and that health board itself is in special measures. That creates a very particular set of circumstances where the governance becomes ever more important, not for its own sake, but governance with purpose. But what we're really trying to get to is governance that recognises risks before they arise, that identifies solutions to those risks, that actually makes sure those solutions are delivered, and above all monitors to make sure those solutions work. And that is, if you like, a very high pressure environment. And that is why, if you look at the report, there's quite a number of recommendations and they're quite highly graded. In other circumstances, those grades might not be as high. But all controls are a response to risk. And if you need to mitigate extremely high, fast moving risks, then those controls, if you like, and I'm sure I've used the analogy of the flood barrier, if not here, elsewhere, I always do. But it doesn't mean that the flood barriers have got lower. It doesn't mean that they've got worse, or they haven't been properly maintained or whatever. What it means is the water's just that bit higher, and there's much more risk of the water just seeping over the top. So that's the circumstance in which we've written this report. If we go into, and I won't go through the detail, we'll just touch on the key things. So you can see, and this is no reflection, it's just different auditors do things different ways. As you will have seen from this, we do a very comprehensive annual report. Most of our local authority partners just don't. It's just a question of style. That's what it is. So some of the things that we said last time we provided the Chief Internal Auditor Service hadn't been followed up overtly, and therefore we've followed them up, and as you can see, some of them are still outstanding, and we've highlighted that. We go through quite a bit of detail on the things that will most mitigate your risk. So, and what you'll see there is an emphasis on the workforce plan, receiving assurance on the workforce plan, which is a common theme, and that's by no means unique to yourselves. But you are reliant on the partners for a lot of this stuff. So you have to, and we're by no means alone in this as an IJB or even in terms of our other health board clients. But understanding whether
Thanks, Tony. Yeah, I know there's an enormous amount of work goes into these reports. There is an outstanding action that's noted as a priority around the management response to the workforce action. So I'd suggest that we finish that up and agree it before the report is circulated more widely. But I would agree it would make sense for all IJB members to see this. There's an awful lot in there that is fundamental to what we're doing. You know, I take your point on sustainability. I think that's a very big question. We've been in a position for a couple of years where the reserves position at year end has given a somewhat unrealistic position of the finances, and that it's looked very rosy when we know it's late allocations or money that is temporarily resting in the IJB's account before going back to government. But again, that comes into the sort of year-end balance question, that using reserves is something you can do in the short term, but it's certainly not an effective long-term strategy. Patricia, you want to come in?
Thank you. Just to acknowledge the work internally by Stephen and our partners in the Council and Health Board, but also to Tony and his team for the report and the points well made. We are planning a whole day with the IJB and the Strategic Planning Group, Tony, in August, to look at our strategic plan, our workforce plan and our medium-term financial plan, to look at that very issue of sustainability, to plan ahead for next year and future years' business cases, but also to develop a shared understanding with our partner organisations about some of those risks and challenges that we're facing and some of the ways we will need to do things differently in order to work within that financial envelope, because what it doesn't show is any unmet need that we have in our communities that we're perhaps not meeting at the moment. So it really sets the backdrop and the context for those discussions. So thank you.
Okay, thanks, Patricia. Yeah, that will be a very interesting session, I'm sure. There's an awful lot of background and data that we'll need to look through to get to that kind of understanding of the position, I think. Okay, any other comments or questions on item 5? Okay, can we then agree that report subject to the addition of the response to item 5 on workforce, and then when that's all concluded, we'll circulate the report to all IJB members for their information, and it will effectively provide some of the background for that session in August, I'm sure. Okay, thanks very much, Tony. Can we move on then to item 6, which is the annual audit plan for 22-23?
So, Chair, I drafted a short cover report for this one because Gillian verbally provided or updated. We provided the report at the last minute of the last meeting, and Gillian provided an update there. So if Gillian's okay with it, I'll just go through the cover report very quickly, and if there's anything you want to add after that.
Yeah, I wasn't sure when Jennifer's actually came along to give a kind of quick overview, Stephen, so it's up to you whether you want Jennifer to still provide that. I just thought since last time there was kind of questions about making sure it gets the full kind of process, so Jennifer is prepared if you want Jennifer to provide that presentation.
Even better, I'll just leave it all to Jennifer then. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, good morning, Jennifer.
Morning. So I'm an auditor in the external audit team, and I am leading on the IJB for the 22-23 audit. As Stephen just mentioned, at the last audit committee, a verbal update was provided, so I will just take you through the key points set out in our plan. So our annual audit plan summarises the audit work plan for the 22-23 financial year. It contains an overview of the plan scope and the timing of our audit, and it also sets out the work necessary for us to provide an independent auditor's report on the financial statements. In Exhibit 2, you will see the risks that we have set out, which are broken into significant risks of material misstatement and other areas of audit focus. The significant risk of material misstatement we have identified is a risk of material misstatement due to fraud caused by management override of controls. So this is a standard risk for all our annual audit plans, and this is in line with ISA 240, and it is a risk that we cannot eliminate due to its inherent nature. As part of our assessment of audit risks, we have also identified one other area where we consider there to be a risk of material misstatement to the financial statements. Based on our assessment of the likelihood and magnitude of the risk, we do not consider this to represent a significant risk, but we will keep this area under review as our audit progresses. So the area of specific audit focus relates to IJB funding, specifically to Scottish Government reserves, which have built up over time. We have already been in discussions with Rona, the new senior financial accountant, about how this should be treated. In terms of the wider scope and best value, paragraph 24 sets out our work that we will carry out on the 4 wider scope areas. We will also carry out some specific audit work on climate change and cybersecurity. And in Exhibit 1, we have set out our materiality levels. So we set these levels at the planning stage of our audit and then review them again later on in the year when the draft annual accounts are available. So as you can see, we have set planning materiality at 4.8 million. This is the figure we use in assessing the overall impact of audit adjustments on the financial statements. Performance materiality is set at 3 million, and this is the trigger for considering further audit procedures. And the clearly trivial amount is set at 140,000, which means that any unadjusted errors above this would be reported to yourselves. As you can see in Exhibit 6 of the plan, we have outlined our audit outputs, and we are working towards providing the independent auditor's report in mid-September. Finally, Exhibit 7 sets out the audit timetable, outlining our key dates. Thank you, and we're happy to discuss any sections of the plan in greater detail or answer any questions.
Thanks, Jennifer. Yeah, that issue at paragraph 22 around the COVID reserves was certainly something that had caught my eye as I went through it. I guess we need to wait and see exactly how that works out. I know that there have been issues around what the IJB retains, what needs to go back to Scottish Government, etc., which makes the position quite difficult to establish. Okay, beyond that, I think the report makes perfect sense, and the timescales are what we were expecting to see. So I think that's fine as far as I'm concerned, unless anyone else has any questions or points to raise. Okay, thank you for that. We'll take that as agreed and move on to item 7, which is the unaudited accounts. And there was an amended paper circulated, Stephen.
Thank you, Chair, and I'll cover that in my brief narrative here. So the purpose of this report is to present the 2022-23 unaudited annual accounts to the committee for consideration. There's a statutory requirement to submit unaudited accounts to the external auditor by the 30th of June each year. And under regulations, the IJB Audit Committee must meet to consider the unaudited accounts. That's why we're here today. There's also a requirement for a 3-week public inspection period, and that commenced for us on the 9th of June this year. The draft accounts will be lodged with the external auditors after today's meeting, and it is anticipated that annual audited accounts will be presented to the IJB Audit Committee on the 15th of September, which will be ahead of the 30th of September statutory deadline. Now, the unaudited accounts are presented in Appendix 1, and I guess just before turning to the recommendations, I would point out the one late adjustment that was made to these accounts after papers were circulated to the Audit Committee. Page 144 of the papers, also shown as page 41 of the unaudited accounts, includes a table. Excuse me while I turn to that particular page. It includes a table of related party transactions broadly halfway down the page in section 10. While the bottom line total of £13.592 million remains unchanged, a couple of the 2022-23 figures have been adjusted. The version that was circulated to committee members on the morning of Monday the 19th of June shows the correct figures, and I can only apologise for the late amendment that meant this went out after the original papers were circulated. A number of figures had been amended prior to first circulation, as a result of the discussions that Jennifer alluded to earlier with Jennifer and with Rona around the best treatment of the COVID funding that was returned to Scottish Government. Most of those figures were amended in time, but as I say, apologies, because the figures in section 10 weren't picked up until afterwards. And so I think it was important that we had a full set of correct, unaudited draft accounts available for today's meeting for noting before we submit those accounts to external audit for review. So that was really the main thing to highlight, and the main reason why there was the late adjustment. I'll just turn back to the recommendations and note that the Audit Committee is asked to consider the unaudited annual accounts, to note the public inspection periods, and note that the unaudited annual accounts will be submitted to the external auditor by the statutory deadline of the 30th of June 2023. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, that all makes sense. So those amended figures don't materially change the overall position. It's some of the detail within that table, but not the total. Okay, that seems fine to me. Did anyone have any other questions or points to raise? No. Okay, I'm happy then that we agree the recommendations, and we'll leave it to you, Stephen, to continue with the work of putting them out to consultation, passing them on, etc.
Thank you, Chair. I think I've just got one bit to sign in terms of the draft accounts, so the unaudited accounts, and then I'll get them over to our auditors today. Thank you.
Okay, and we've previously seen the timeline, so we're fine for meeting the statutory deadlines of going through the remainder of the process. Okay, can we move on then to item 8, which is the annual assurance statement?
Thank you, Chair. It's me again, but this time it'll be just a very, very short introduction. The report presents the Audit Committee's 2022-23 annual assurance statement for approval. And pending approval, the statement will be reported to the IJB board as part of an annual governance assurance process that requires annual statements from all of the IJB committees and subgroups. This year's statement is attached in the appendices, and it sets out the attendance, the meeting dates and the business of the committee between 1st of April 2022 and 31st of March 2023. And the Audit Committee is asked to approve the annual statement so that it can then be passed on to the IJB board. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, this seems fairly straightforward in the usual fashion, and is pretty much a factual summary of the year's work. So I was happy with that, unless anyone else has any comments or questions. Nope. Okay, happy to approve that then for submission to IJB, Stephen. And item 9 then is National Audit Report and Inspection Overview.
Thank you. So it provides an overview of national audit, scrutiny and inspection reports published since the last Audit Committee meeting, which was held on the 17th of March earlier this year. 6 relevant reports have been published, 5 by Audit Scotland and 1 by the Mental Welfare Commission. The 5 Audit Scotland reports are listed in the table in section 4.1, and there's a summary of each of those reports in sections 4.2 through to 4.9. The inspection report by the Mental Welfare Commission is noted in section 5.1. I wasn't planning today to go through all the summary narrative, but I would draw your attention to the IJB financial analysis in section 4.4. The key messages from the 2021-22 report, although it is a year out of date, remain completely relevant to today, including challenges from increasing demand, workforce pressures, and planning and delivery uncertainties associated with the National Care Service. We can't wait for that National Care Service to deal with our financial workforce and service demands, and Tony certainly alluded to that earlier as well when we looked through the internal audit annual report. And essentially the transformational changes needed now to ensure financial stability and service improvements. There's a similar theme, a similar message in the Local Government in Scotland overview report, and that too calls for radical change and greater collaboration. So while there's a bit more detail in the reports, I think the key messages are around these pressures and the need for transformational change to ensure stability, and the need for us to work closer together in order to deliver that across the public sector. And so I'll leave it at that. The Audit Committee is asked to consider and comment on the content of the National Audit Inspection Overview report. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I did read the Audit Scotland report, and while there were really no surprises in it, it was a sobering read. And as you say, it's 21-22. All of the same issues, or even writ larger, are probably relevant for 22-23 as well. Certainly when you see words around challenge, uncertainty, etc., it does give a very bleak picture of where we are and the issues that we mentioned earlier in terms of what we need to do to get onto an even footing. Tony?
Just very quickly, on the last opportunity to depress the meeting even further, if you take those reports in context with the one which I think came previously, which is the NHS in Scotland report, and indeed the one about the health and social workforce, there's an awful lot out there that all points in the same direction. So that does kind of explain our internal audit report and why those grades are as they are. And it's one thing, of course, identifying the problems. It's another actually having the solutions to them. So it is sobering. But on the other hand, I think that the message we tried, I didn't mention it quite so much, which is why I just wanted to nip in. It does give you an opportunity. There's always that thing about don't waste a crisis. Because when you get to that point, all of a sudden, and don't get me wrong, when you start to make the changes that will be needed, there will be politicians that get upset by that. That's the nature of it. The public won't always be happy when they get mixed messages. The Scottish Government almost certainly won't be happy. But on the other hand, when you are in a situation where things do start to become quite extreme, that does give you the opportunity to kind of maybe push through entrenched boundaries. So in terms of the relationship with partner bodies, in terms of the relationship with the public, and the one thing I have seen quite a lot is actually the public get this. The public do understand that there needs to be change. They're not daft. And so if you are bold and brave, and I suppose that the thing that I didn't say in my report is about the importance of supporting officers, so challenging them to make the difficult decisions, challenging those decisions when they come to you almost in private, if you like, but making sure that you stress test it. But once you've agreed a plan of action, when it starts to get rough, as it may well do, supporting the officers and saying, no, this is the right thing to do, this is what's necessary, and these are the changes we need to make. And that is an opportunity, because people do understand that need, and frankly, there's not a great deal of choice. We will have to start doing the things that maybe we should have been doing quite a while ago. So it's not all gloom and doom, because it does give us that momentum, that impetus, that need to start changing the things, which after all is what the IJB was created for.
No, absolutely, Tony, and major change is often a difficult process to go through. It is about retaining belief in that end point, that the change process will be worth it for the transformation that's achieved. And I mean, we all know the position we're in with increasing demand and not an infinite source of money or staff, that we can't just continue going on as we are, putting sticking plasters over and hoping it all works out in the end. There does need to be that major transformative change, and that's what we're working towards. Okay, on that note then, we'll move on to item 10, which is the government statement improvement actions. Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. So the report provides an update on progress to implement a range of improvement actions identified through the annual governance statement and from various internal and external audit reports. Improvement actions are grouped into 4 broad categories, and these are listed in section 4.1 with additional detail contained within Appendix 1. There's an explanation of the RAG ratings in section 4.2 of the cover report, and sections 4.3 through to 4.6 provide some additional context to the appendix. I have slipped the timelines tentatively for the work on the integration scheme and the MSG self-assessment, while resource negotiations continue with Scottish Government and final plans are developed. And I'll know the timetable proper for that once those discussions have concluded. In terms specifically of the risk share and the finance elements of the integration scheme, an initial draft has been developed by the Deputy Director of Finance in NHS Forth Valley, and this has been reviewed by the Council's Chief Finance Officer. My own review is in progress, and there's likely to be a requirement for further amendments and further reiterations thereafter as we go through all the track changes. I've also conducted an initial review of the SITFA financial management checklist, and it became apparent to me during that review that a wider self-assessment, including senior management and board members, is required. And I'm also in discussion with Jocelyn Lyle from Internal Audit regarding the Audit Committee self-assessment that's referred to in this report. And I will report back on those discussions as well once those have concluded with Jocelyn. So that's just an update on some of the main items within the report without going through them in detail. I'm conscious that some of the items here are also referred to in the risk management report that follows, and they were also discussed, or they're in the detail within Tony's report too. So I think I'll just stop at that if that's all right, and ask that the Audit Committee note the progress report on improvement actions. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, I mean, these issues, as you say, do come up elsewhere as well, but it is helpful to have them grouped together in this format so that we can get the overview of them. I mean, they're all sitting at amber in the RAG status, so kind of in progress. Some of the timelines have slipped for understandable reasons, but it will be good if we could try and stick to the revised timescales if at all possible. Difficult as that is to achieve with everything else that's going on. I think there are some crucial issues, as you say, around the review of integration scheme and the risk share, which also come into some of the issues around escalation and the action plan there. So again, there are kind of interdependencies in all of this. But we'll continue to see this as a standing item, so we can assure ourselves that progress is being made. Are there any other questions or comments on item 10? Nope. Okay, can we move on to 11 then, which is the Strategic Risk Management Performance Report?
You might be glad to hear this is the last time you'll be hearing from me today, Chair. So this is the last report. It's the Strategic Risk Management Performance Report for the period from the 1st of April 2022 to the 31st of March 2023. The first annual performance report for Strategic Risk Management was presented to the Audit Committee not that long ago, actually, but it was last year, and was the result of internal audit recommendations following a review of risk management arrangements. The report provides assurance on the adequacy and effectiveness of risk management arrangements. It outlines work to further embed arrangements, and it includes progress against the risk management action plan, where we can see a mixture of progress with some actions complete and some timelines extended, particularly around the training, deep dives and risk appetite. The report's contained in Appendix 1. Broadly, it can be broken down into 4 areas, outlining the IJB's governance arrangements, strategic risk review, operational risk review, And finally, the Risk Management Action Plan. The report is broadly similar in structure to last year's report, although it is slightly pared down from the previous version. We didn't see a need to include the current strategic risk register as an appendix when it already appears on the agenda, and we've already covered that today. Appendix 1.2 includes a comparison with partner strategic risk registers, while Appendix 1.3 summarises progress against the Risk Management Action Plan. And finally, the report notes key achievements and work planned for the current year. And the Audit Committee is asked to approve the Strategic Risk Management Performance Report for 2022-23. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, I found it very helpful to see this as an overview of the work across the year and to remind ourselves of the progress that's been made. I think the phrase mixed progress is used, and there is a lot of good progress, although some items, as you say, where timelines have extended and we know there is still work to be done. But at least we know and are highlighting where those outstanding actions are. So yeah, I'm happy to approve this. Tony?
Really quick one. I think one of the things that is helpful for the risk management report to do, and if I've missed it, it's down to advancing years, but I didn't actually see a conclusion on risk management arrangements. And actually, I would say, yes, it's mixed progress, but actually there has been good progress. So in an ideal world, and this is real kind of auditor nerdness, but we like to see the words adequate, assurance, the risk management arrangements are adequate and effective. And as an auditor, I would say you could read that report and say, yes, there's more work to be done, but you could actually conclude that arrangements are both adequate and effective. And I'll throw in a little caveat, which is to say that in future, the risk profile might be such that you can't necessarily mitigate to the level you want. But in terms of the arrangements, I think you could actually conclude. So if perhaps Stephen was to say, and on that basis, I'm happy to assure you as an audit committee that arrangements are adequate and effective for the minutes, that would be perhaps a useful thing, because it kind of gives you that assurance. So when you send the accounts to the externals, you've got that overt assurance, even though, to be quite honest, you can easily draw that from the thing. But it's just nice to actually have the words spoken and recorded, so it covers you as a committee.
Yeah, fair comment. Sometimes it's good to be explicit rather than implied. Stephen?
I think we will make sure those words are included in future versions of the report. And thank you, Tony, because I actually agree. I think there's been a lot of progress in a number of areas in the space of just over a year, actually. I was reflecting on some of the things that have some of the achievements that we have put in place. This is now our second risk management action performance report in just over, well, probably about 13 months. We've got a revised risk management strategy. We've got a medium-term financial. There's quite a long list of things that we have achieved. So I'd be happy to assure the committee today that arrangements are adequate and effective, and hopefully that will bring a smile to Tony's face too. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. The committee is happy to accept your assurance. Okay, now we've got all that sorted for the minute. Were there any other questions or comments on this report? Nope. Okay, we'll take that as agreed then. Is there any other business in relation to today's meeting? Nope. Okay, that's not bad. We've got through it in an hour or so. Some really good work there. Thanks very much to everyone who's been involved in preparing the papers today. And I'll see you all soon. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Well, not me, Chair, so I shall say my goodbyes.
Is this your last meeting, Tom?
Oh, yes.
All right. Okay. Well,
and my successor has hopefully been appointed. Well, they've certainly offered the job to someone who I think will be absolutely excellent. So I can walk away quite happily. So thank you very much for your time. And I'm actually supposed to be off today, so I shall go off and hit the golf course.
All right. Okay. Well, thank you for all your work over the years, Tony. It's been a pleasure, sir, and enjoy your retirement. Enjoy the golf course.
Yeah.